Hi everyone and welcome back to the Colour Cave where we like to play with the art stuff. My name is Jem and for today's Drawing for Beginner tip video, it's a subject that I feel is quite important and it's certainly the thing that I have had to spend the most time on when it comes to learning to draw, and that is talking about shape. So I'm going to go into a few details about this and also show you some exercises that you can do to help you improve on this. It's something that I still do to this day and it's something that I feel I can always improve on, and it really is a foundational part of your drawing, so it's important that you get it right from the start. Otherwise, the rest of your drawing can be beautiful and it still doesn't look quite right. So we're going to get started on some of the things you can do to practice your shapes. Let's get going. In our last video, we talked a little bit about pencil control and practicing different strokes and different shapes. If you haven't watched that video, I would highly recommend it before continuing with this one. I'll link it down in the description so you can get to it right now, but I'll also put the link to it in the end card if you want to go back and watch it later. It's up to yourselves. So today we're following on from this. Now, as I said in the introduction, the basis of your shapes are what is going to make your drawing into one whole complete piece. But using these shapes to break things down when you're learning is a really helpful thing to do. It's a brilliant exercise and I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do to have a good practice at it. So when I talk about breaking something down into basic shapes, what this does is it starts to build a library in our heads of how to draw things. So let's take the example of a simple flower. If I was to draw a little sort of daisy shaped flower. Now obviously this is not the height of my art skills, this is just quickly to show you. So if we draw our flower and say it's got I don't know, maybe it's got a little leaf down there or something. So if you were going to draw a flower, in your head you want to put down the basic shapes first and then you can build out from there. Now in order to do that, we're going to work backwards when we're learning because we're going to work from subjects and break them down so that we can store that information away in our heads, and then later on when we are ready to draw from our imaginations, it's stored away and we can just recall it and we can recreate the shape on the paper. So if we take our little daisy friend here, the obvious place to start is the fact that there's a circle in the middle. So I'm just going to do this with a red pencil so that you can see. So if I were to break this down into simple shapes, I've obviously got a sphere in the middle, and then each of these petals can be broken down into two shapes. So we've got our rectangles that we've been practicing before, and obviously they go all the way round. They are going to be slightly different sizes because these petals are not uniform, but that's okay. And we've also got these rounded parts on the top, so that's basically half of a sphere, so we can draw them in too, like so. And then when we come down the bottom here, we've got the stalk, which is just a really skinny rectangle there, and then another one at a slight angle here. And then we've got this leaf shape. Now there's two ways you can tackle this. If you want to keep it really simple, you could have it as a rectangle, but we know that there's this sort of point here. So like we did with the petals, we can say that that is a triangular shape, and then just a shorter rectangle at the bottom. So that's what I mean when I talk about breaking down shapes. Now if you were to take away my original pencil lines, you would still be able to see that that is some sort of flower, and you can do this with practically anything. One of the things that I hear all the time from new artists is, how come I can't draw from my imagination? And it's about that library that I was just talking about. You can't expect to know how to draw something straight out of your imagination if you have no basis or no library of basic shapes to learn from. A really good example of that is fantasy animals. Now obviously I don't know anybody that's seen a dragon in real life, but we learn by drawing other animals that are similar. So for example, lizards. And we learn about eye shapes and things like that, but you're never going to know how to draw that unless you have a reference photo or some sort of reference library in your head that you can recall that from. And that's really the point of today's exercise, because what it does is when you come to start your drawing, you have a basis to work off and it's going to give you something a bit more solid. So just some more examples of this that you can do. A really good thing to do is to grab a magazine or print something off of the internet and just take some photos and take a marker pen and try and break them down into basic shapes. Some of you will recognise this chap. This is Hector the camel, and he's one of my my own little creations. So it's a little bit more complicated, but I wanted to get down the fact that in order to draw something, you have to know where those basic shapes are coming from in order to build on your drawing. So let's take Hector as another example here, and let's just start at the top. We've got a kind of funny four-sided shape here. So we can break him down roughly into a rectangular shape there. Now we've got these ears and they are more or less triangles. So we've got these triangles here. And then we've got his head. Now I would split that down at the top of his eyes. That's quite a good line. So we've got a triangle shape there. And then we've got two spheres here for his eyes, and then we have this lovely great big triangle down here, and then we've got this oval shape in the middle. That is his muzzle, and then we've got two triangles here for his nostrils, and we've got a rectangle, and then we've got another triangle. So you can see where I'm going with this, and being able to break that down is the first step to rebuilding your own drawings later on. So I've got a few examples of photographs that I've taken that are simple objects, and I'm going to link them on the Cave website, which is here. So if you want to head to the website and go to the resources section, those photographs will be there for you to print off for yourself so that you can try and break them down into basic shapes. So now we've talked about the breaking down process, we want to talk about the building up process. So I'd like to go back to this daisy in inverted commas that I was talking about earlier. We know roughly what shapes we've used there. Now the question is, if I use those basic shapes, am I able to recreate a similar flower? Not necessarily a daisy, but using the knowledge that I have, that I've stored away in my brain because I've already done it. So we talked about this circular shape. So there's the middle of our daisy, and then it was rectangles all the way around. So I'm just going to add in some of those. Okay, and then we had the little spheres on the top. So you can see why that first lesson in practicing your shapes is quite important already, even at this stage. And then we had a sort of very skinny rectangle, another skinny rectangle, and then another rectangle here, and then a triangle on the top. So even at this very, very early stage, we can see that this is remotely shaped like a flower, and it is just made up of basic shapes, and that's the beauty of this. So we can call this like our underlayer or our structure layer, or just your initial sketch, whatever you want to call it. But what we can do now is we can start to refine these shapes, and this is the next step after blocking things out. So this is quite important as well. So with my graphite pencil now, when I think of a flower, if I were to follow these lines exactly in these basic shapes, I'm going to have some pretty blocky shapes going on. And they're going to look a little bit rigid. When we are drawing things that are geometric, like buildings, this is perfect because that is exactly what you will want. You want nice, crisp, clean lines. However, this is an organic shape, and organic shapes tend to be a little bit more difficult to draw. What I'm doing is I'm using my basic shapes as a guideline rather than a solid tracing line. So when I start to do this petal here, I know in my head, I've seen a petal before, I know what a petal looks like. So I can use that as a rough guideline, but I can just smooth out some of the edges of those basic shapes. And you can see the difference between this one and this one. It's just got a little bit more curvature to it. It looks a little bit more organic. And we can just sketch those in very lightly. Obviously I'm pressing a little bit harder so you guys can see what I'm doing. But all we're doing here is really refining what we've put down as our initial sketch. So you can stray from your guideline a little bit, and then we can start to put in our sphere here. This looks like a happy little flower, doesn't it? There we go, and if you're happy with that, you could maybe start adding in some more of these shapes, because you kind of know what you're doing by now. And you can just sketch them in, and maybe try and squeeze another one in there. Ooh. And then we have the stalk. So again, we've got this rigid sort of kink in the stalk, and all we want to do is smooth that out. So rather than going at the angle like this, which is what we've drawn already, we can just put that into a curve, a really soft line, and we can do the same on the other side, on this outside part, like this. And then we can do the same with our triangle shape here. So all we're doing is we're basically like chiseling off those rough edges and just making that a bit of a smoother line, and it's still very much our triangle and our rectangle, there's no doubt about that. And lo and behold, it looks like a flower. So naturally, the more objects that you do this breaking down exercise with, the more objects you'll have stored in your memory, or at least have a rough idea of what you should be doing when you're going to draw from scratch. And that is all part of the learning process when it comes to shape. Now this is important because if you don't have a basic grasp of those shapes, your drawing's going to look wonky, and you know, that's something that, yeah, it's going to cause you a bit of problems, because you're going to look at your drawing and you're going to think to yourself, it's good, but there's just something a bit off about it. And 9 times out of 10, it's the shapes, it's your initial shapes, it's your initial outline. And I personally took a long time to get those things right, particularly if it was new things that I was drawing. Which brings me on to the next thing. When we are learning, there is a huge difference between drawing from reference and drawing from a reference, and this is debated all the time in the art community. If you are drawing from reference, what that means is you're going to take lots of images of the same subject. So let's say it's flowers. You are going to look at all the different images, and what you're doing is you are learning those basic shapes that make up what it is you want to draw. If you are drawing from a reference, you are copying a reference. Now, a really good example of drawing from a specific reference is portraiture. If you are painting a portrait of someone and you're working from a photograph, you're absolutely going to want to copy every last inch of what's there. In terms of your own artwork, that is generally not permitted because it brings down copyright issues to the owner of the photograph. And you'll hear a lot of people telling you when you learn to draw, it's better to draw from life. We are going to come to that, but that also helps with the copyright issue as well. So if you are drawing from reference, you are looking at a number of sources to determine the shape of something. And one of the first things that did that to me, I was drawing a fox, and I wasn't sure about the shape of the tail because I was wondering how thick it was at the base compared to the back side of the fox, and where it actually started to, you know, sort of thicken out and become bushy. So what I did was I went onto the internet and I looked at about 40 or 50 different photographs of foxes to get a general idea and a general feel of what the tail would look like in different positions. And that then gave me a basis to add it into my own drawing. So that is the proper way to draw from reference. The only time you should be drawing from a specific reference is if you're working on a commission for someone or you're doing a portrait because you want that to be an absolute likeness. You cannot draw from a photograph and pass it off as your own work because you're effectively stealing from the person that took that photograph. If you have their permission, that is a completely different thing. So one of the things that I have drawn recently are my dapper gnomes, and these are effectively gnomes that likes to wear suits and ties. So if I'm going to draw one of my dapper gnomes, the first thing I always start with is their face. So for that I'm going to use a sort of oval shape. and then add a triangle for their chin because they've got quite long faces and they've got pointy chins. And then they've got their hats as well, which are classic gnome hats. So we'll give this chap a slightly jaunty angled hat. And then from there I can add in the ears, which is just 2 little ovals. And that's pretty much the basis of my gnomes. Some of them have sticky out here, so let's say this guy's got sticky out here, so that would be some triangles. And then I'll pop in their noses. So that in effect is a triangle as well. And then we have 2 little eyes, which are just these little spheres. And you can do whatever you like with their mouth, that's just a curvy line. So if I was going to refine this now, again I'm going to do this in ink so you can see it better. Again, we're talking about smoothing off those edges. So this little chap's going to have a kind of foldy over hat. So that's going to be a lot softer around there, it's not going to come to a point. And then when we come down and join onto his head, I'm just curving that line like this ever so slightly, and it's just to take away those harsh lines of our basic shapes. And then I can follow this round, and that's more or less just the curve of my sphere. And the same with his hair, I'll just soften those points. A little bit. And then I can start working round and drawing in his ears. Again, he's got a little kink in his ear, so I can just add that in. And the same with his chin as well, I'm just going to round it off. Before I get to that point, I'll have to move his mouth down. There we go. And then his nose is like a little ski slope. And I can put in my eyes. There we go. So homework for this is to find some pictures either off the internet or in a magazine and try and break them down into those basic shapes that you've already learned and start to build up that bank of information for your own drawings in the future. The next step is then to build it back up, try and recreate those drawings just using the basic shapes and try rounding off some corners and see how you get on. I do think that the daisy is a good example and a good one for you to practice. And that will be you on your way to getting your shapes right for all your beautiful drawings that you're going to create in the future. That's it for today, guys. I want to thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you in the next video. Have a great day, everyone, and bye for now.